We're live. All right, here we go. Just gonna wait and make sure. 2 o'clock. Here we are. Welcome. Happy Shakespeare's birthday, everybody. Glad that you could join us online for Shakespeare's birthday. There's a lot of stuff going on today, all over the internet, and we're happy to be a part of it. So this program is called Staxpeditions. I'm Greg Prickman, and I am the librarian at the Folger Shakespeare Library. And I have been joined today by some of my colleagues from near and far, and we're going to try a little something that we haven't really done in this format before. So just by way of background, Staxpeditions is a concept that we came up with at the University of Iowa several years ago. And at the time, myself and Colleen, who you can see, and Adam, we're all colleagues together at the University of Iowa. And Colleen really developed this concept into a video series. The idea being, we take a request of some sort, usually pretty general, and then we would go and we'd fetch a book from the closed, non-circulating rare book stacks. Mm-hmm. And without knowing what we were going to look at, we would fetch something off the shelf, and then we would look at it and describe its features and share it with people. So we did a whole series, Colleen did a whole series of videos like that. But then in that same period, Adam and Colleen every year would do a Shakespeare's birthday live stream. So since then, I've moved on to the Folger. Colleen is chief curator at the Special Collections Research Center at Syracuse University. And Adam is at the University of Iowa in the Department of English and the Center for the Book, where he's an associate professor. And so we thought, given that we've all sort of spread out, now we're in this really unusual situation this year on Shakespeare's birthday, where we're all interacting online. And we thought, what if we take this opportunity to sort of get the band back together and do something live on Shakespeare's birthday, but put this little Staxpeditions twist on it and see if we can look at some stuff and talk about it that we haven't necessarily encountered. We don't know what we're going to see, but somebody has to know what we're going to see. And that person is also on the screen, and that's Rachel Dankert. She is the Learning and Engagement Librarian at the Folger Shakespeare Library, and she is the intrepid librarian who has trekked into the digital stacks in response to the answers that you submitted to questions we posed yesterday on social media. And she's matched those responses with some items. And then we're going to look at them and we're going to talk about them and we're going to answer questions, and we're just going to see where this leads us. So that's it. 1 hour. We're going to see what we can find and see what we can examine. So I'm going to try to keep us on schedule, but otherwise we're going to let this thing free range wherever it can go. So Colleen and Adam, greetings. It's good to see all of you again. Rachel, we've been working together now for a couple of years, but we're now in this situation where I can say, it's good to see you again too.
It's good to see you too. And hello, shout out to the rest of my fellow Iowans, because I too was at Iowa during that whole time period. So we're bringing the band back together, just like you said.
So we're all back together again, which is really fun. And there's a very strong Iowa streak running through this whole thing that we're going to do here. But it's Shakespeare's birthday.
A city of literature always produces literature lovers, no matter where they happen to end up.
Yes,
absolutely.
We're all Iowans at heart.
Yeah, we take it with us. So, but it is Shakespeare's birthday, so we're going to talk about Shakespeare, and we're going to look at some stuff from the Folger collection related to Shakespeare. But in order to stick with the concept, we did put a couple of questions out. And so Colleen, if you could read the first question and maybe a review of what some of the responses were that came in, and then we'll see what Rachel has for us to look at.
I could, but through the magic of live internet, it clicked to a different page, so it'll take me just a second. Yeah, but I know in the spirit of looking forward to spring, We asked about question 1. I've got it up now. What's your favorite flower? Hibiscus emoji, sunflower emoji, tulip emoji, cherry blossom, daisy emoji was the question. And we had a lot of answers to this question, including Metageeky, who was responding daisy. Laurel is books, said violets. We've got from Mrs. Cat 9, we've got a sunflower emoji. So either sunflowers or sunflower emojis are the favorite flower there. We've got R. Tracy 3Y with white roses. Jen K. Stone with roses. Well, we've got quite a few roses down there in the responses, and tulips and peonies and orchids and stargazer lilies.
Oh,
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Nice.
I don't know that category of lily off the top of my head.
So
Jasmine's useful Shakespeare has hydrangeas, so a complete range of flowers to look to dream about for this spring.
And that's good. I think everyone's looking forward to spring in wherever you are. The appearance of flowers is always something people look forward to. So, Rachel,
Yes.
you have expeditioned into the collection. What do you have for us to look at?
So, for my rose fans out there, I have a rose is a rose is a rose, or that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So for us today, I have a view of the 1599 line from the second quarto of Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet dwells on why must we be named what we're named. And then I have the 2 title pages from the 1597 and 1599 Romeo and Juliet quartos. And I thought we could talk a little bit about Shakespeare's beloved play and roses.
Okay, but wait a second.
Yes.
Adam Hooks, quartos, second quarto. What on earth are we talking about here?
So, great question, Greg. The first published version in 1597, we call them quartos because of the way the pages are folded, right? So it's kind of like a modern paperback. That's kind of the analog that's often used. Printed by one of my favorite printers, John Dankert, because he had such a bad reputation in book history and bibliography scholarship. The version in 1599 from 2 years later is very different than that first quarto in 1597. It's longer. There are a lot of variations in the text. Once upon a time, although not anymore, we used to call these the good and bad quartos, but that's just ridiculous. They both have a lot of value for both of us. And in this particular passage, so Rachel, you've pulled up the 1599 text.
Yes.
And in the 1597 version of that speech, it's not by any other name, it's by any other word would smell as sweet. Which is it seems like a minuscule difference, but actually when you're talking about what your name is, and that is so much about what the play is about, the power of words and of names in particular, especially in this speech from Juliet. So that's a quick overview of the 2 quartos, and I will just add that all of my students will know that both title pages misnamed the play because it should be The Tragedy of Juliet.
Yeah.
And that other guy.
We always like to point out at the Folger how ridiculous it is that Juliet's name is so small on the second quarto title page. It's barely legible right there.
I'm sure there's much that we could conclude about that. So, Colleen, when you've done a lot of teaching and had material like this in front of a lot of students, what would you say is people's reaction when they realize that what we think of as Shakespeare as being just sort of fixed and eternal and universal actually doesn't agree with itself when you get into the early versions. I mean, what do people make of that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, since I teach primarily undergraduates, I think maybe that's a difference that's possible when starting to bring classes in to look at variations of text that maybe isn't a complexity that's brought up as much in the high school classroom. At least it wasn't for me. You know, my experience with learning Shakespeare in high school was about what's going on in the play, the content of the play, maybe even reciting it or performing it, but thinking about how it came to be the text that it is. We didn't go that deep. So thinking about the history of printing, having multiple printed versions of a book in the classroom, those are the kind of new questions that really come to mind, that come to light, you know, when being able to compare different versions, and really to think about how a text like that, that's sort of ephemeral and out in the world, and maybe even words get changed based on an actor's interpretation, you know, at some point it's set on paper, and that version isn't exactly the same as other versions, even though you get this paperback in your high school classroom where the text is set. So I think that's an interesting question that can come out in a special collections classroom when multiple texts are on the table. And I bet Adam has lots of experience with this too.
Well, and Adam, these, you know, the dates on these, 1597, 1599, this is when Shakespeare was alive. So does this show us what people who were contemporaries of Shakespeare, who were living and working in the same time that he was, is this what they knew of? How many people would buy something like this?
Absolutely. From the moment that Shakespeare wrote it and it was first performed and it was first printed, Juliet and Romeo was always one of Shakespeare's most popular and well-known plays, as it continues to be today. We don't know exactly how many would have been sold. Several hundred copies of each of these plays would have been printed. They were reprinted on a very regular basis, which is an indication that lots of people wanted to own it and read it, and of course pass them around to their friends. There are a number of different ways to access the text besides just buying a brand new copy. We also know that this helped affirm Shakespeare's reputation as the preeminent poet of love, especially in the 1590s. Juliet and Romeo is a play that was often mentioned in conjunction with Venus and Adonis and Lucrece. So this is just completely confirming his reputation. And we know this from a bunch of allusions in poems and plays of the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that I really appreciate about the 1599 edition as someone who works in the Folger collection is the little note that we have right here, collated in perfect JPK 1798. It speaks to the enduring legacy of Shakespeare because we see someone using this book in 1798 and they're treating it as a book by collating the pages and looking at the construction of the book. But JPK is actually John Philip Campbell, who I have a picture of right here, as Mercutio in the production in the mid 18th century. So a good portion,
fantastic.
I know, a good portion of our quartos were owned and collated by John Philip Campbell of the Campbell Siddons acting family, for my theater friends out there.
Wow, that's fantastic. So we have a question that's come in. So since, you know, a lot of us are really familiar with the good and bad designation to separate, classify quartos, what adjectives would you use instead? If those aren't really adequate anymore, how would you describe the different categories of, say, this work, for instance?
I'm apt to just say 1597 and 1599, because neither one of these printed plays matches up with what you get in your Folger Shakespeare Library paperback edition that you read in high school or college. well, I would tell you the words that I would not use, and one binary would be theatrical, and my least favorite word on the planet, literary. Because yeah, there may be some things that the 1597 quarto has to tell us about how performance was represented on the page. That's very, very valuable information. But literary is just a ridiculous term that Shakespeare would never have used, simply because it's longer. I don't know, maybe short and long, shorter.
Yeah. Different.
Yeah, early, later. Okay, well, I'm going to move us along just a little bit because we had a lot of favorite flowers come in response to the query. So we're going to actually look at some flowers now.
We are. We're just going to walk through a printed garden here. We have a couple of images from Gerard's Herbal, John Gerard's Herbal of 1597, and these are hand-colored contemporary with the book. So on the left, we have a couple of daffodils that someone really wanted to bring to life, and they made me think a little bit of the emoji responses that we got. And then we have a different kind of rose. We have a hellebore on the right-hand side, otherwise known as Lenten roses. And we have a bunch of those around Washington, D.C. But here you can see that someone has left some handwritten notes. They've given another name for the plant, and then say that they are of a greenish herby color. So herby is my new favorite adjective. And that they underlined it because it meant something to them. So that's from Gerard's Herbal. But then we have this really amazing herbal from 1562, and this is the Czech edition of Pietro Mattioli's herbal, and we own the wood block. So here you can see the original version with the flower here, and then another small flower here, and there's that same flower in reverse, and you can see the lines that are etched there. I'm going to zoom out. Sorry, hopefully it doesn't go too crazy on you, but there's the original wood block for this page. And this is a flowered lettuce. It looks a little like it's bolted, which would mean it wouldn't taste very good. But very interesting to see the reverses. But I love seeing a wood block of a natural thing because you have nature talking to nature here. But the fun reverse side of the wood block is actually this. They reused it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Wow. That's outstanding.
Isn't that great?
Wow.
So we're still working on what this is.
That's amazing. So for perhaps we have some viewers who aren't as familiar with how books were made in this era, but it's a wood block. It's literally a block of wood, and you can see on the block itself, especially down in the lower portions, those lines, that's where the wood was cut away, basically. So you can see the motion of the tool that was used to cut that wood away. And so you're leaving behind the lines that take the ink to be printed. But what about the color? So we print this wood block with black ink, just like the text. But what about the color in that image? Who wants to tell us what is going on here?
Well, I can take some of that on. You know, if you wanted to add color to a page, you'd have to print the page multiple times. Most of the time, color is added by hand, by actually painting the page. What I love so much about what you've brought to us, Rachel, is that it really emphasizes the craft that goes into book production. The fact that you can see so much of the labor and the artistry that went into making this print to be able to bring this plant to life in black lines, that then they add so much more dimension. I mean, you can see on the leaves even how they've gone in with the green and different shades to, you know, they're adding shading with the very tight lines on the wood block, but then they're adding even more depth and dimension to bring, exactly there. You know, the lines themselves with the cross hatching are adding the darker shades, but then with the different shades of green, they're emphasizing that even more by going in by hand and adding those details that make it sort of true to life. Green, herby. They make it even more herby.
Yeah, and definitely a hand process, a unique, each one of these is going to be different. And so Adam, first of all, if Shakespeare's words are so important and have survived and keep being revived, why should we care about pictures in the same way if we're studying the text? When you start to think about book history, etc., why are pictures important? And how often does this addition of hand coloring occur? And again, what does that tell us?
So images are, first of all, amazing to look at. And you get this real interplay in texts like the herbal here, where you cannot understand what you're looking at unless you have the image alongside the text. The second thing I would say is that this encourages multiple modes of literacy. There's a different form of engagement and literacy that you have if you're hand coloring the image. Although this particular reader is writing notes and underlining things. So they're engaging with the text and in the image in different but complementary ways. To go back to our Juliet and Romeo play, John Dankert also published a ballad about Shakespeare's play of Romeo and Juliet. It doesn't survive. There's a good chance it would have had some kind of image or multiple images on it, so that even if you could not necessarily read in the ways that we think of encountering Shakespeare in a classroom, you could still engage with this text through the image, through the sound of the words, singing the song. So in this case, you can see, and back even the title pages of the two early quartos, right? They had those printers ornaments and devices, right, which is a crucial kind of signal, both for the printer and publisher, printer or publisher, and for customers also. And just the layout of the page, right? The most excellent and lamentable. It pleases the eye, even if it doesn't necessarily please the grammar nerds among us.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right. I just kind of want to stare at that for a while.
I know.
That's just so great. And it also, I mean, it really speaks to the survival of evidence that has come to us from these earlier times, and what it tells us about how these things were made, what a production process was like, the fact that this material was used and reused. You know, oftentimes a block like this, you think, why does this survive today? And in part, you know, some of these blocks, so much labor was put into their creation. They were a commodity in and of themselves. And so the blocks would be sold, would be traded to other printers. They'd show up in other editions. They would be modified and overcut with other things. And this just shows you that layering of use of a single block, which is just great. So, all right, Rachel, thank you.
You're
for
welcome.
These examples. That's
I'm gonna
pretty
stop
great.
share so that we can
all right.
address another
So
question.
now it is time for question number 2.
Question number 2. What's a word that currently what's a word that describes your current circumstances? And there's a wide range of answers to this question, so I'm really interested to see which direction you took it, Rachel.
Okay.
You know, because there's there's a lot of different realities in our world right now, from uncertainty, frustrating, expanding cottage farm, blanketed, perplexed, bored, missing the spring. Hopefully we brought some of that back with our display of flowers. Lackadaisical and impatient, indoors, isolated, unsettled, you know, so there's a lot of different responses right now.
Yes. So the way I decided to take this prompt was to just really engage with the emotions that people are feeling. It's it's an experience that we're all going through together. And what we have in the Folger collection is the ability to kind of share with you ways of interpreting those emotions that are through Shakespeare in performance. So what I have for us today are 4 different emotional responses that were inspired by what we heard from people on Twitter. So in the upper left-hand corner, and I'll zoom in as we go, these are the 4 attitudes of Fanny Campbell as Juliet. There's that Campbell name again. She's the niece of John Philip Campbell and well known as probably one of the most recognized Juliets of the 19th century. So here, I like this a lot because it shows the ways that, you know, it's ups and downs. Every day is different right now. And this sort of cycle of emotions that we're going through is represented by the different things she's feeling as Juliet. This in particular, this look right here, that's how I think we feel on those days. So, and I have more about how amazing Fanny Campbell was. We can get to that. But we have a variety of different formats. This painting of John Henderson as Macbeth meeting the witches with Banquo behind him, that is a surprise within a surprise. So we'll talk about that in a moment. And then here we have R.B. Mantell as King Lear. And I love the connection that he as King Lear out on the heath has with our flower question that came before, and that this really like earthy and natural Lear was something that he was well known for. And Ophelia, we have Julia Marlowe as Ophelia during her madness. Julia Marlowe corresponded with our founders, Henry and Emily Folger. They knew her very well, and she ended up donating her theatrical memorabilia to us. And so we have a really amusing collection. But this picture I show to a lot of classes when they come to the Folger because everyone has a response to it and they all read a different emotion in this space.
All right, I think you have risen to the challenge of pairing a wide range of responses to the prompt. I mean, we have a quarantine beard, I think, going on here, and just the look on her face is sort of sums it all up in many ways. So I think, yeah, there's a real a variety of emotions that people are feeling, and sometimes that's true within, you know, a 5-minute span of time. And so, I mean, Colleen and Adam, what do you make of this kind of material? How does this kind of documentation tell us something about Shakespeare? There are no words here. There's no, you know, what do we take away from this?
I have two things to say about this. The first is that these are all actors, and so this is a way for people to engage with and preserve the ephemerality of performance. And it tells us something extraordinarily important about how Shakespeare was perceived by particular productions, by particular actors on stage, how people in the wider culture were able to understand the fame of someone like a Fanny Campbell. So it gives us a kind of window onto the theater that we simply lack in the same way for Shakespeare's lifetime. We have to rely on text without image, with the exception of the occasional woodcut in an early Shakespeare quarto. Here, we have some sense of what the performance looked like. The second thing I would say is that at least since the 18th and especially in the 19th century, Shakespeare or excerpts from Shakespeare were often used to demonstrate emotions. Not simply for people to make sense out of the plays or to make sense out of their own emotions, but to actively perform and speak those emotions yourself. So that one is particularly amazing because it is like an image version of, let's say, a 19th century elocution manual, which would give you different Shakespeare excerpts that would demonstrate different expressions and emotions. So there's a real kind of psychic engagement with Shakespeare's plays that really touched a lot of playgoers and readers.
Yeah. So, Colleen, you have done a lot of work on social media, and I think are pretty well versed in a lot of the ways in which people react and interact with images today. What do you see in this about how images communicated in an earlier time, and where are the parallels?
Well, I think what most comes to mind in response to your question is how little I think changes with how we respond to images. What I liked so much about what Adam said is that in this thinking about this sort of like an elocution manual is, it's presenting poses, like concepts for emotions. And I think all of us have some that come to mind. If you think of, Hamlet holding a skull, there'll be like a pose that comes to mind. We have that same sort of thing today. And they're really, if you think of a fast moving Instagram feed, it's something like that you can grasp so quickly that you get the emotion from, that is something that really stops you and makes you take a look, and that is something that you can take away. So I think, the way that we react to the emotions of images, hasn't really changed all that much. It's just much, much faster as you're scrolling down an Instagram feed.
Yeah.
So Colleen, are you saying that these images are like 19th century Shakespeare memes?
Yeah, absolutely. Shakespeare memes. They still have to sell. This is the top the left to me looks like a magazine of some sort. It's some sort of made to be sold, made to be featured in a window in a shop. So it's both telling something about Shakespeare, about emotion, about cultural norms, but it's also something that people have to want because they're going to want to spend money on it. Ultimately, it has to emotionally impact you, but also in a way that you'd want it and want to hand over money for it.
And if a meme is mimetic, which is where it comes from, I mean, that is the Macbeth painting to a T. Macbeth is always recoiling. Macbeth recoils is the stage direction. And here he is meeting the witches. And John Henderson, who played Macbeth in this instance, was not known as Macbeth. He was actually a very famous Falstaff, and that was his key role. But here in this sort of one night only painting by George Romney, his friend, we can see him doing the classic Macbeth of recoiling from the witches, and they're gesturing upward to shush him, which is also a classic thing that they do. One fun fact about this painting is that it's actually overpainted by the artist George Romney over an engraving or a picture that looked like this of his own artwork. He needed to make a quick copy, and so he painted over the actual printed ephemeral piece that was mimeographed. Not really, it was a lithograph, but he just painted over the same thing to give himself a quick thing that he then gave to the subject as a present.
So once again, we see the reuse of material, something
Yes.
that is one of the things that keeps happening. So I see in front of us with what we're seeing, some of this is just, the most iconic stuff. I mean, Macbeth and the witches and Ophelia and Lear. We do see a lot of this and a lot of those things. So we have a question that has come in. Michael Sinclair asks, what play has the most materials out there about it? If you had to pick one.
We should take a poll.
Yeah.
I think we each have a different answer.
Oh my.
You may have stumped us, Michael. You may have gotten us.
I'm always willing to hazard an answer, so I'll say Hamlet.
Yeah, I was gonna say Hamlet. Although I think Juliet and Romeo might be close. I don't know.
The most painted was Macbeth.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we could even sort of break this down by scene. There are scenes that are subjects that keep recurring, even if maybe there's less about the play as a whole. It's a good question. This is the sort of thing, a collection like the Folgers, with a little bit of data analysis, we could start to at least, maybe suggest, and I would suspect it might differ by time period as well, because plays come in and out of favor and always have. And so that's going to make a difference too. Yeah.
What I found exciting when you brought these images up, Rachel, thinking about poses and popularity through time, in the classroom, I think it would be so exciting to lay out images of a scene through time, because as you see those poses repeated again and again, as you see the changes in costumes through time, I think it's really exciting because a lot of, at least undergraduate students, often have the experience of having seen a Shakespeare show live in their lifetime. These are showing actors and scenes. And I love it in the special collections classroom when there's a chance to have that perspective. Like, I have watched a Shakespeare show now, and through these materials, I'm seeing this evidence of being an audience member of performances through time. I love it when you can make that connection, and Shakespeare is a subject that can do that so easily since it's been performed for so many years and recorded. Those performances, actors, costumes, that experience has been recorded for so long. You can really get that sense of perspective. That so many people have been able to experience that through time, and I can experience that as well. I find when that happens in the classroom and that matches up, it's pretty magical.
It does, and it's amazing how much history speaks to itself.
Well, and I think that's something we're experiencing now too, that we're clearly in a global situation that is historic, and the effects of it, we don't know the full effects of it yet, and how people are going to come through it. And I think that something like the way that these emotions are expressed through Shakespeare, the connectivity of it is this sense that people have been through crisis and tragedy, and they have come through it, and these words and these thoughts were with us through those times as well. So I think that's part of this idea of the way in which the emotions that people might be feeling right now can be captured from an earlier time, even if the way in which they're staged or presented is different than what we experience now. It's still something that puts us in touch with earlier times that people have struggled.
I would just add really quickly that at least in our own time, not necessarily specifically about the pandemic, but just in the last few decades, the cultural authority of Shakespeare actually licenses people to engage with emotions that maybe they would not otherwise want to recognize or acknowledge or express. This is why prison Shakespeare has been such a powerful tool. This is why People give clinics to corporations. You know, I know these are two very different things, but like team building exercises with Shakespeare, because it allows you to express something that you might feel or are being asked to feel, but it's the safe space of being able to do it through Shakespeare rather than to put yourself on the line. I'm sure it's very different for actual actors who are putting themselves on the line like this every single night, which is what makes the Julia Marlowe photo just like astonishing.
Yeah, yeah.
It is so striking.
So striking. That's great. So I think we are now at the time where we're going to head on to our third question and see where we go this time.
Yeah, so the question number 3, the answers are a lot longer on this one, so we'll have to
really fascinating.
Judge and figure out how many to read. Think about a time you attended a play and tell us about that memory. There were a lot of comments about, things that happened with actors, mistakes that sort of, broke the spell of the play. At the sound of music, Maria fell down in the middle of something good. Things like that where the spell was broken. 12th Night, excellent seats, a magical performance, sad, hilarious, suspenseful. So it was also interesting to me in reading the answers how it brought out emotion words in a very similar way to the previous question, despite it being an entirely different question altogether. I can just read one or two more here. Glass Menagerie, the first play I ever worked on in a real theater, probably age 15. I rumbled the thunder sheet. It changed my life.
Thunder sheet.
Experience of participating in the play, and not as an actor, which we, of course, immediately bring to mind, but all of the supporting people that it takes to put on a play. And I love that is what came to mind for Annie Hall 60, because it takes so many people to make that magical experience happen. But Rachel, I don't know which one you drew from.
I drew from all of them. So I took this in the direction of performance and the materiality of performance. So I have two things that speak to each other. On the left, we have Edwin Booth as Richard III, or as Iago, pardon me. And then his Iago costume in our collection. Edwin Booth being the brother of John Wilkes Booth, but actually was quite way more famous than his brother John until A Day in April, 1865. So that is his Iago. He was very well known for that role. He also played Othello frequently, which I find fascinating that he played both leading roles. And then on the right, we have Paul Robeson and Uta Hagen in the 1945 Othello. And this was Robeson's first performance on an American stage. He had mounted Othello in the 1930s with Peggy Ashcroft, but due to various regulations, he was not allowed to be on stage with another white person in America. So his performances had to be in Europe until the 1940s. And then here we have the costume design along with some fabric from the costume in our collection as well.
This is just such great stuff. And I think it is interesting in both cases that you've gone to, we have costumes and both design, and then in the Booth case, the actual costume itself, because that is something about that experience of seeing a play that I think does resonate with people, is how it's presented, what the costumes look like. And it's interesting to see how that can survive. You think, Folger Shakespeare Library, we've got a lot of books and documents, but we also have some other kinds of stuff. Yeah. To me, both the images of performance and then the stuff of performance are both part of this and probably form some degree of how people make memories from performance. So Colleen and Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, I am just so struck by what you pulled out, Rachel. I want to go in two directions because I know so many of our social media commenters were really focused on the emotion of the experience. But I'm a librarian. I go right when I see this. What I'm so excited about is how in your paper document here, you know, in this sketch, what's standing out to me is the green.
Yes.
You know, and then in the actual fabric, the green has faded so much that if I only brought out the costume, I wouldn't have seen the green. And I'm just so excited about the things that you can learn when you're cross-referencing with different types of historic material. You know, that by having the two of those together, what you've just presented us with is like such a research opportunity to unravel and identify new things when you're using the different documents together.
Yes.
But that's what I get excited about.
I will say that this is all of a sudden triggering something in my memory about, I had read our former exhibition manager pulled one of our costumes out of the box to put on a dummy for exhibition, and it stank. It smelled like sweat. Even after 80 years of being in a box and basically not consulted, there was still this residue of performance on it, that there's a sensory experience that makes me kind of long for us to be with the items again. So I'm just having to imagine that during this time where we're all meeting in a Zoom room. But that there is a multi-sensory experience whenever you approach something, even if it's a document. There's always, you have to notice what it feels like, how it smells, the weight of it. All of these things play into our interpretation.
Absolutely. And the value of having so many together in one place,
yes,
is that you can learn even more when you place them next to each other. To see this sketch and then the photo of it, you know, in 3 dimensions on our actor, you can really get a sense of it so much more than if you had the one document alone. And that's just what's so exciting about working with research libraries.
So Rachel, that's maybe why we, you know, it's much safer to smell books.
Yeah.
We have plenty of those smells too
yes.
in a research library.
Mm-hmm. Well, tells more information by having that real fabric document a costume. You know, there's so much more you can learn. I'm really excited about how much we're able to investigate virtually today, but also excited for the day, as you said, Rachel, when we can have that full experience again.
I've got just a couple of quick things to say about these amazing archives here. The actual fabric, the actual costume. This makes perfect sense to me because Shakespeare's theater company probably spent more money on costumes than anything else. That is one of the things that you would remember if you went to the theater. So, talking about people having an imprint in their memory about certain theatrical experiences, certainly seeing Richard Burbage and friends dressed in these lavish costumes would make an impact on you, and including for those who thought that the theaters were unethical and immoral. What are these lowly actors doing wearing these fancy clothes that may have been recycled from actual actual aristocratic wardrobes? And also you can see, putting these side by side, the kinds of differences in costumes at different periods of time. So we've got kind of mid-19th century versus mid-20th century. Very, very different conceptions of the plays. And these two actors symbolizing, Rachel alluded to this, but both Edwin Booth with his less famous and then more infamous brother, and then Paul Robeson. And just the fact that both of these actors played Othello in very different, but unfortunately very similar in some ways, political circumstances, is also something that that I would certainly want to bring out in looking at these materials.
Yeah,
since we had so much fun with costumes, can I show you a couple more costumes that I found? We had a lot of commenters who loved Midsummer. And so I wanted to show you an 1888 production of Midsummer Night's Dream by Augustin Daly. So this bottom costume and Titania is totally, the donkey head just brings me so much joy. And this is mounted in an extra illustrated volume. Augustin Daly owned Daly's Fifth Avenue Theater in New York City, and he made souvenir scrapbooks of all of his productions. So here we have the page, and all of the images from the production stills match up with the page in the play. So here we have Bottom talking to Titania. What angel wakes me from my flowery bed? Oh, it's Bottom. So I thought that was really wonderful. And then we have a couple costume designs where Moth looks like a moth. And my favorite of all time, Mustard Seed.
Oh.
So,
oh, wow.
Just wanted to share that and end it on a lighter note.
Yeah, this might be the grand finale here.
Yes. The poor actor who played Mustard Seed.
Wow.
What an uncomfortable position.
Yeah,
it really is.
That's really, really uncomfortable. That's amazing.
When is this Mustard Seed from?
1888.
Oh, okay, same.
Yeah. These are all right. Thank you, Colleen, for clarifying. These are all from the same production, and Daly had them mounted in a book by Augustus Totenberg, and we actually have 13 of them in our collection. So really wonderful.
It was very common in the history of performance of Midsummer, especially by the time we get to the late 19th century, to try to quite literally imitate the forest on stage, to the extent that there's a notorious production where there are actually live rabbits on the stage.
I think the way they do the rocks is very inventive.
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, I think the memories that people express about, think of a time you saw a play, all of this, it's experiencing this in person and admiring the artistry that goes into it, the creativity. And again, the documentation that we have shows how this evolves over time, because today when these things are staged, it looks much different. It says something about today. That's just endlessly fascinating. So there you go. I'm gonna bring you back to one last question, a response from each of you, and I think it's a good way to wrap up. So Peggy O'Brien asks, what aspects about all of this expeditionary work is the most exciting to each of you? So going by the order on my screen, we'll go Colleen, Adam, and Rachel.
Sure. Well, going back to the very beginning, I think one of the things that daily is most exciting for me working in a special collections is that it doesn't matter how long you work with a collection of historic materials, it's always larger than you are. You can explore a collection for 40 years and the next day something will still be new and something will still surprise you. So that, like, I can be a guide, I can go into the collections, I can find things to put in front of people, but there will always be things that are just as new to me as they are to our patron, to our learner, our researcher, our student, so we're in that same place of exploring and finding new things. And I really hope that can feel just as exciting and that the library can feel just as welcoming, you know, for the person who might be experiencing that for the first or 10th or 20th time, as opposed to, you know, 9 years in, like for me. The exploration is the same sort of new and just as exciting.
Adam.
Well, yeah, so I would say just a couple of brief things. And one is it's such a chance to see a collection, even one that you might know very intimately, through someone else's eyes, and therefore to learn something new, to gain a new perspective. So, you know, Rachel picking out these various items today based on questions that you know, answers that were submitted, is just a wonderful opportunity for me, because, you know, I do this for a living, you know, and I have certain interests, and it's great to see the world through someone else's eyes. I would also say that that's one of the fundamental parts of my teaching. Very often in special collections, I'll just call up some random things I've never seen before so that we can mimic this kind of interaction, and it demonstrates to students that they can be, that they have expertise themselves, beyond the simple fact of the joy and pride that one has when watching someone who was at one time an undergraduate at the University of Iowa go out into the world and do all of these wonderful, amazing things.
Thank you.
That's great.
So now
Rachel.
I have the joy of getting to share the stories in our collection with people. There's always a story in something, and there's something for everyone. And that's why I love digging into the collection that we have and at other institutions, because I know that we'll eventually hit on something that sparks a research interest or sparks joy. That's a simple thing. That's something that we can give to people. And I also love that I'm constantly learning, and that I can share that learning with other people and kind of recreate that experience of discovery every time I show someone something. We're internally at the Folger always sharing new collection things with each other. Yesterday, we had a staff meeting where we found some terrifying masks from The Tempest because it was sort of the creepy stuff in museums. And most of our staff hadn't seen them before. So the ability to constantly stumble on new things is a really rewarding, and getting to re-engineer that for our audiences is something that I find really exciting. And now I feel like we know our audience, our users better, our Twitter friends, we know them a little bit better working off of their responses.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, that's great. And I'll just conclude with my response to the question, which is the thing that I think is so great about getting to do this, is talking with all of you, because every time, you know, we can bring stuff out all day long, but it's when you get a group of people around that stuff that you start to discover new things, and new perspectives come in. And there is no end to the new perspectives that can be brought to this stuff from all different ages and races and stages. And, you know, there's so much more to learn and discover. So every time we get a group of people together to talk about this stuff, that's really where so much exciting stuff happens. So thank you to all of you for participating in our Staxpedition today. Colleen, Adam, Rachel, thank you. This has been a lot of fun to do, and I hope we can do it again sometime. I also want to specifically thank two people that you have not seen today. That's Ben Lauer and Miriam Trowell. They are Folger staff, colleagues of ours who have been working behind the scenes to make this live stream happen, and we're very appreciative to their efforts. Let me conclude by saying, if you're in a position to do so, I hope you'll please consider making a gift to the Folger. It's your support that allows us to preserve and protect these unique collections. So thank you for your consideration, and thank you for watching and going on this journey with us. Up next, we are going to have a segment. We're going to visit with Casey Kaleba in his studio for a look at how to stage a sword fight in your own home. So if you've spent Shakespeare's birthday sitting around listening to people talk, now's the time to get up, grab a broom or something, and hopefully don't break any furniture, and maybe get yourself moving. So we'll end on that note. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.